before the commercial break even hit inside the studio. Jimmy forced a smile, the kind of smile people wear when they know the tide is shifting, and there's no use swimming against it. "Well," he said, half laughing, "this has been educational." Karoline gave him a single nod. "Glad I could help the crowd." Chuckled softly, but it wasn't laughter at her. It was laughter because of her. She had seized the narrative, and there was no unseizing it. Jimmy tried again. "So, final question. What's next for you? Planning a run for office?" Karoline shrugged. "Just telling the truth. Wherever that takes me." Another clap. A few more this time. The applause wasn't forced. It was earned, and Jimmy knew it. That's what hurt most. The show ended with the usual credits. The theme song, the applause sign blinking above the stage, but something about it felt off. The rhythm had cracked backstage. Karoline shook hands with the staff. Some nodded respectfully. One stage hand leaned in and said quietly, "You were something else." She smiled, said, "Thank you," and walked out, still calm, still composed. Her phone was already buzzing. 300,000 views, 400,000 Asha Chatan. Kimmel meltdown was trending. By the time she stepped outside, back in the dressing room, Jimmy sat alone. The jokes hadn't worked, the smug angle didn't land. And worst of all, he could already see the headlines being written without his input. Karoline Leavitt flips the script on late-night television. Leavitt walks into the lion's den and makes it purr. Kimmel outmatched on his own stage. His producer entered quietly, holding a phone. "You should see what's happening on Twitter." Jimmy looked up. "Is it bad?" The producer paused, then offered she made a point. By the time the sun came up, it wasn't just Twitter talking. It was everywhere. Fox News, the Daily Wire, even CNN couldn't ignore it. Clips of Karoline Leavitt's interview were spliced into every news segment. Every headline carried some version of the same message. Leavitt owns Kimmel on live TV. Kimmel caught flat-footed one sentence that ended the interview. And no matter where you stood politically, you had to admit, this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a shift. Cable anchors debated whether Kimmel had invited her as a publicity stunt or genuinely thought he could control the narrative. One panelist on MSNBC called it the most unintentionally honest moment late night has had in years. Even rival comedians started weighing in. One wrote, "It's not the guest's job to make the host look smart, especially when the guest came smarter." Jimmy Kimmel stayed silent that morning. No tweets, no damage control, no statements. Just a few behind-the-scenes texts to friends that reportedly included the word rough. Karoline, meanwhile, was in full stride. She released a short statement, just, "Afternoon. Truth is undefeated when you let it speak without a filter. Thanks to Jimmy Kimmel for the opportunity." Short, clean, no gloating. She didn't have to. The video was doing all the talking. Podcasts lit up. Commentators on both sides couldn't help but dissect the interview line by line. The sentence, "You do damage control with a punchline," had already become its own meme. Young conservatives shared it proudly. Independents said it hit a nerve. Even liberals quietly admitted she'd been shockingly well prepared. And that's what stunned the media most. This wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't a tantrum. It was calm, composed, and completely under control. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't insult him. She didn't storm off or play victim. She just spoke, and for once, the media couldn't spin it. There was no gotcha moment to reframe, no quote to take out of context. Every word was already out there, and every viewer had already seen what happened. Karoline had done something rare. She'd flipped the format, not just on Jimmy Kimmel, but on the entire late-night playbook. and the ripple effects were just beginning. By Friday night, the pressure inside the late-night bubble had reached a boil. Writer rooms buzzed, not with laughter, but with anxiety. Executives were calling emergency meetings, and the unspoken question that had lingered since the interview was finally being said out loud: is this format still working for decades? Late-night TV had operated on the same rhythm mock. The right, protect the left, feed the crowd what it already wanted to hear. But Karoline Leavitt had shattered that rhythm with one interview, one sentence, and zero apologies. Producers scoured over the footage, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. They studied the audience, reactions, the expressions, the silences. But the truth was too simple to analyze. Jimmy had lost control of the room, and worse, he'd lost control of the story. Karoline hadn't come to play the villain. She hadn't come to be humiliated. She came with facts, with composure, with a sentence so clean it couldn't be buried. You don't do comedy anymore, Jimmy. You do damage control. It was the kind of line no writer could top, not because it was flashy, but because it was true that truth hit different in an industry built on illusion. And while some networks tried to downplay the moment, calling it a one-off anomaly, others weren't so sure. One former late-night producer went viral with a post that read, "When your audience starts clapping for the guest and not the host, it's not just a bad night, it's a warning." Karoline, for her part, stayed above the noise. She did no interviews. She refused to gloat. She simply posted a quote to her followers the next morning. "You don't win arguments. You win attention, and then you earn trust." It got over 1 million likes. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel returned to his desk the next night. He didn't mention Karoline by name, but his monologue felt different. The sarcasm was thinner, the audience quieter. Halfway through, he paused, looked into the camera, and for the first time in years, he seemed unsure. "Some of you really liked last night's show," he said. "Some of you didn't." "Oh, fair enough," he forced a laugh. "That's the fun of live TV, right? But it didn't land because everyone watching knew it hadn't been fun. It had been real, and late night didn't know what to do with that." A week later, the buzz still hadn't slowed. Down clips from Karoline's appearance continued making the rounds, now translated into multiple languages. Political channels broke the interview down frame by frame. College debate teams were using it as a case study. And for the first time in recent memory, a late-night host's loss wasn't just embarrassing. It was historic because Karoline Leavitt hadn't just out-talked Jimmy Kimmel. She'd changed the rules for years. Guests had come on shows like his prepared to smile, deflect, and survive the comedy gauntlet. But Karoline had done something else entirely. She'd stayed calm, she'd stayed factual, and she'd stayed in control. Even as the jokes came, even as the crowd hesitated, even as Jimmy tried every trick in the book to throw her off balance. She had walked in as the underdog and walked out the headline. But perhaps the most shocking moment came days later, when a short editorial aired, this time not from a conservative outlet, but from a surprising voice, a longtime political analyst. No fan of the Trump administration offered this: "Whatever your politics, what we saw wasn't just a PR win, it was clarity." For the first time in a long time, someone sat in that chair and spoke without fear of being mocked into silence. That matters. The words rang louder than expected because they came from someone who had once mocked Karoline on air himself. It wasn't just the audience that had shifted, it was the culture. Meanwhile, Karoline kept moving. She didn't ride the wave, she redirected it. No interviews, no victory tour, just one quiet post on her social media. It was never about me. It was about telling the truth in a room that forgot what it sounded like. That line alone got picked up by major outlets, because again, she'd said what no one else had, and people noticed in political circles her name was now being floated for higher roles in media circles. Late-night hosts were re-evaluating their approach, and in homes across the country, people were watching the clip not just once, but over and over, not because it was flashy, but because it felt honest. And in a world where people are trained to expect a punchline, honesty hits harder than any joke ever could. Karoline Leavitt had walked into the lion's den. She hadn't roared. She hadn't raged. She'd just spoken one sentence. No filter. No script. And she left the stage without raising her voice, but raising the standard.